everybody. Welcome back to Critical Commentary. I'm Taylor, and today we are going to be doing something different. Because school took me away from a lot of the discussion this year, I felt like it would be, I didn't want to let all of my opinions and my thoughts about these specific projects to just disappear in the ether. So I thought that maybe I would just do kind of like a top 10 list. It's not like a top 10, like the best of the best. I will be doing a best and worst of 2022 roundtable that is in the works. So be on the lookout for some stuff for that when that eventually airs. But before we get into all of this, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, go ahead and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video here on Critical Commentary. To make this a little bit easier on everybody, I did decide to pick 5 films and 5 TV shows that I have been watching that I wanted to share with you. Quick disclaimer, I will be doing these reviews why you should be watching it styled, just because I'm not sure if you've seen the projects that I picked. So I just wanted to let you guys know before we get into this list. I'm also going to try to organize it and put either chapter codes in the video and the description. So just be on the lookout for those in case you want to skip to certain parts of this video. I will warn you, I am a sucker for costumes. So I do have 2 costume drama, I guess they're both dramas, on this list. The first of those being The Gilded Age. This series is pretty much, I guess, the closest HBO could get to having a Downton Abbey, considering the creator, Julian Fellows, is also the showrunner of this series. It stars a girl named Marianne who pretty much is an outsider, and she comes to New York during the Industrial Revolution, and it's during Knickerbocker Society, and she is there to stay with her 2 aunts who are a part of this society, and she pretty much gets to live across the street to the fictionalized versions of the Vanderbilts, who were nouveau riche and were pretty much ostracized from a lot of the older parts of American society. So there are 100 echoes of Downton in this series, but it's really cool that there are a little bit more nuances added that I feel like you couldn't see in the former series. For one, Marianne, who kind of fills in as the Lady Mary of Downton, has to kind of share the spotlight with Peggy. And Peggy is this like burgeoning author. She is starting to write, and she has her own storyline, her own love story. I like that they wanted to give a little bit more history towards Black society during this time. I feel like we don't hear a lot of, like that Reconstruction era for Black people and how there was a time of Black wealth. We are starting to see more stories like that being told, but I do like that this is it's a very significant part of the story. It's not a B plot. I'm glad that they're going to be returning for a season 2, so if you haven't caught The Gilded Age yet, please make sure to find them on HBO Max. Oh, also, I feel like I should mention that there are bustles. Did I mention that there were bustles? I feel like I would be just not authentic if I did not have this next submission on my list. I had to include Wednesday on here simply because Jenna Ortega is just becoming a scream queen. Not to say that I don't love, things like the Fallout that she did, which was also on HBO Max, but I have just been in love with so much of her horror work. I saw her in X. I so when I saw the pictures, the concept photos of Tim Burton's Wednesday, I was not totally sure about it at first, just because I think, Brody Chanel says it best in her video about just the Tim Burton era and, whether or not we're having a, end of that era. So now that I'm sitting here and I'm talking about this show, it feels really surreal because I loved Tim Burton growing up. I loved Beetlejuice, Corpse Bride, like just so many of his works are really a part of my childhood and my upbringing and kind of why I like creepy, spooky things. To see him being able to talk about the Addams Family, it's kind of crazy because I felt like it was going to be a little bit more like Rob Zombie's Monsters version. I know that like there is an audience, but when you have these like more creative and willing to be outlandish directors taking on these classic horror properties, you start to wonder if this is something that's going to be for you. Spoiler alert, it definitely was. Jenna Ortega shines as Wednesday Addams. I loved just her delivery of humor. There were some little things that I had issues with the smaller cast, like the supporting cast. I felt like, this might be a common critique, that the other members of the school weren't as fleshed out as Wednesday was, which I will kind of agree. I feel like her roommate had a really weird arc that was kind of difficult to understand, but I overall found the story to be really good and the costumes were amazing. I love that Christina Ricci was able to come back in such a big way. And not to mention Gwendolyn Christie. You gotta rep your, GOT alum. The series had a bit of a Nancy Drew vibe, which I was really interested in. It kind of felt like it should have been what I was hoping Sabrina would be. And it's interesting that this is a Netflix property because I really felt the same hopes and wants from Chaos that I did not get, especially near that season finale and that series finale. The twist was a little bit, I think obvious, but to be honest, I think it was still interesting and it was still effective. And I still went ahead and started questioning myself a few times. So I think at the end of the day, it did what it was supposed to do. And I think that's why this was a really good show, just because the tone and the storyline and the plot and just everything was kind of like carried with the right amount of pacing and with the right amount of pizzazz, color. Even though this is supposed to be a dark story because it's Wednesday, I felt like the show was still able to give us this brightness because you have to compare both Enid and just kind of the rest of this town that is, where the school is located. You have to see this contrast between her and them. And so I found looking at the show to just be really captivating. And then having the story the way it was structured, I felt like it just worked for an easy binge and definitely gave me some good spooky material after the Halloween holiday. Now, this next submission should have had its own video. I honestly feel like I could not contain my notes when I was writing about this series. The White Lotus has easily become one of my most favorite and like most anticipated shows that is on HBO Max right now. Season one was, so good, and I really enjoyed it. And I've been watching some of Mike White's interviews, and I love how he talked about, season one was supposed to be about money, and season two is supposed to be about sex. But I think there's a little bit more there than just those things. Yes, the show talks about people who are privileged, and it talks about, it has a bit of an upstairs, downstairs effect. I think that the show is more sophisticated. It feels very Shakespearean, even Chaucerian, and I would even go as far as to say it runs as if it's a Greek tragedy. And I feel like you could see a little bit more of that in season 2 because there are more like art pieces and sculptures that are tied in. You see more lore. There's the Madame Butterfly reference and the like conversation on the island. It really like foreshadowed a lot of what was going to happen. And I feel like in Greek tragedies and even in Shakespeare tragedies, there's always this sense of fate, right? And this show definitely had that essence of fate and fighting one's destiny just to fall into it in the end. And I love just the generational discussion with the grandfather, father, and son, you know, how they're all kind of the same person. It reminds me of Riddle in Oedipus Rex, you know, the young man, the man, and the old man. Just kind of like, I don't know. It was just very, I felt like there was a lot of symbolism there in this season. I know that they were kind of hinting through the Madame Butterfly that season 3 might be set in Japan and they might discuss death, which I would love to see. I love the White Lotus. I will definitely be trying to cover the White Lotus in the future as things, you know, pick up, but I don't know if we'll have another season, at least not until 2024. So, yeah, if you haven't seen The White Lotus, please go ahead and watch that on HBO Max. So, like I said in my disclaimer, I had to have at least 2 costume dramas in this year's list. The Serpent Queen is about Queen of France, Catherine de' Medici, who was a really interesting figure in European history. I'm really glad that they decided to make a series about her, especially one that kind of tackles the complexities of her. On one end, she was, I mean, one of the baddest women in Western Europe during the, you know, Tudor dynasty. She also was an underestimated person. The show kind of runs like a Yorgos Lanthimos film in that they take a lot of, I think, the tone from The Favorite, and everyone's using like more modern language. The jokes are a lot more of date. I did like the "we're all related" joke that was used in one of the episodes. Oh Lord! Just because I feel like it's researched well. Like you can tell whoever made the show, the showrunners, were paying attention and they were doing their research. And so it feels like, you know, while it's a little bit inaccurate, it's accurate in getting the zeitgeist of who Catherine was. You know, I think about just some of the stuff like them talking about her being a witch and using black magic. Like that was a rumor during that time. You know, people did kind of believe this about her. And so it's cool that they leaned into some of those parts because I think you're able to get a more comprehensive view on who she was. Samantha Morton honestly brings this character to life. I have loved her for so long. I first came across her in Minority Report with Tom Cruise, and then I was reunited with her again as Mary Queen of Scots in Elizabeth the Golden Age. So it's funny to see her play Catherine de' Medici because Catherine de' Medici is Mary Queen of Scots' mother-in-law, and they don't have the best relationship. So it's very funny to see things like that. And it's also funny to see how, because they have modernized certain parts of the story, characters are now being portrayed in, I think, a more realistic light. My last series submission will not be a surprise to anyone who has seen my Midnight Mass video. I am a huge fan of Mike Flanagan, and I this was not necessarily my favorite work of his, but I did really enjoy it, and I felt really bad that no one was talking about this series. I mean, to the point where Netflix did not renew their contract, and so Mike Flanagan has released some like downloadable content where you can see where he wanted to take the storyline. I believe Amanda the Jedi does a video where she talks a little bit about some of those theories. So if you want to check that out, I totally recommend you do so. I love Mike Flanagan. I think that, you know, his submission with Hill House was probably what made me fall in love with him as far as a director and just showrunner. I am a huge sucker for things that look beautiful, and he just knows how to do that. And I think because I also like theater and the fact that he loves to give monologues, I feel like that he's broken away from that. And this story or this series doesn't really have that, but to some degree it does, because the Midnight Club is about telling stories. The story of the Midnight Club is centered around a bunch of teenagers who are living in this hospice community, and they spend most of their nights telling each other stories. And some of these stories are related to the series that this show is based off of. I never read the books, but if you have, I would love to hear your thoughts on how these stories were adapted, because I know that there were changes made from the original source material to what we saw on screen. I found these stories that they were telling to be really interesting just because it gave us a chance to understand the characters more, and it fleshed them out a little bit more, because each story that each person told was vastly different from the other, you know, and they all had unique ways of telling their stories. So it felt like we were able to see how they both processed themselves, each other, death, their illnesses, because everyone was dying from different things. And it was just really a good story overall, because I think that just Mike Flanagan knows how to just get you right in the feel. Where I had some gripes was that this did not necessarily scare me. I know that, like I said in my Midnight Mass video, that horror's not supposed to be scary all the time, and I get that, but I've been really enjoying kind of having a little bit of an adrenaline rush, as long as it's done in a way that's earned properly. And I feel like he's good at earning those kinds of jump scares. So it would have been nice to have a little bit more. There were, you know, essences and like homages to things that were scary, but I didn't necessarily feel tension. I felt like there was more grief here. And so, I mean, I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing to feel, but I think that I think because I just kind of cemented him in my mind as this horror director, that, you know, when I see him veer off from that, I'm kind of like, what are you doing? No, come back. It's very much that. Mocha latte. Mocha latte. I feel like this is going to be a longer video than I anticipated. I want to know how many people even know this movie exists, because I have not seen a single, like, I haven't seen any Oscar buzz around this film. And what doesn't make sense is because I feel like this should be Oscar worthy. Like right now, there's not a lot of like strong contenders. And I feel like this is, I don't want to say it's like, you know, comparable to The Blind Side, but it is one of those things where it's those sports, like real life biopic, feel good, you know, a little saccharine to some degree, but still like an earnest story about real people who have gone through real experiences. For those who've never seen this movie, The Swimmers is on Netflix, by the way, and it is about Yusra and Sarah Mardini, who are Syrian refugees. Yusra became an Olympic swimmer for the refugee team. And Sarah is currently incarcerated because she was a refugee volunteer and helping people get out of, I believe, Syria. So this is one of those tales that is just like, so, I mean, you need to see it. It's real. And I will say what made me want to watch this was the fact that the soundtrack was just so nostalgic. Like, I love the fact that it was all like Y2K, like early 2000s music. So I was just like bumping in my chair the entire time. When I was in undergrad, I studied language and literature, and I had a professor who introduced me to a French film called Leanne. And it was my first introduction to Vincent Cassel. And it the reason why I bring this up is because when I saw this next movie, I just was immediately reminded of that somehow. It just felt like they were connected in some sort of way, even though it's not really about the same thing, but it does have this commentary on class. And I think that might be why I feel like Athena and Leanne are very similar. Athena uses brothers to pretty much tackle police brutality, Islamophobia, and social class in France. And it's very, I like that there is this vantage point aspect to that because we see different perspectives through these brothers. They all play different roles in telling this story. And what really made me go, wow, I need to watch this film is because in the first like 5 to 10, I think it's somewhere around that time from the 5 to 10 minute mark. It's all like one long shot. And I'm not really totally sure if it's one long shot, but the way that they go from like inside the building to outside the building to inside a car, and then they kind of hang outside the car. Cinematography was on point, okay? The advertisement for this film said that it was made by the same production team as the one that did Les Miserables. And I feel like, yes, there was something about the film that just made me want to just hear just a little bit, just like an overlay of something of that sort or something from that show. Like that would have been, I think, really amazing because the story is about a revolution. It's like this is one of those movies that I'm feeling like, where is the buzz? And I'm wondering because, you know, The Swimmers and this movie are both from Netflix. I mean, for me, this is like Roma. You know, this is one of those films that could be, there is just something about it that is just so truthful and so artful. And I just don't understand why it hasn't been a part of the conversation. The Banshees of Inisherin was definitely on my highly anticipated list of 2022. And I'm really glad that I saw it because I don't think it disappointed in what I was expecting to see. It definitely defied my expectations and what I got, you know, as an end product. But yeah, this was an interesting film.
It was super awkward.
When I was in elementary school, I actually had an Irish teacher who used to read to us stories all the time, and just tales. And they had some of the most beautiful artwork. And I feel like this story was a lot more on that end. Uh, and I know this is not, Irish, this is technically Scottish, but I was imagining that, Banshees of Inisherin was going to be a little bit more like Still Game. Pensioners going to the pub, having fights, but it being kind of light. This was not light. This was a dark film. This was very, very dark. This was so dark, but like so funny. I am a huge fan of Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell. I've loved them ever since I saw both respectfully in Harry Potter and Daredevil. Cause yeah, I watched that Daredevil. I love them both, and I just really feel like they had such great chemistry. The full the full tone was just so good for a dark Irish comedy. And I think that the supernatural elements were used very well. I wish there had been more, I'm not going to lie. But I feel like what was there was still very significant. And I definitely started, trying to find the banshee in the background, because I definitely started to pick up on that later on. And I will say definitely be looking, because it's great. This is a great film. I'm glad that this is one of the, main front runners for the Oscars. And yeah, go watch it. Go watch it. It's very good. It's a little slow. It's a slow burn, I'm not gonna lie, but it is very good. I definitely felt like I had to put this next film on my list. Yeah, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies was it was, yeah, yes, yes. I have nothing else to say. That is the end of my review. I think what made me decide to watch this film was just the fact that I knew who everyone was. We've got Amanda Stenberg from The Hate U Give, Rachel Sennett from Shiva Baby, Chase Sweet Wonders from Generation, Maria Baklova from Borat 2 and Guardians of the Galaxy, and Pete Davidson for, dating everyone. Like I said with Banshees of Inisherin, I love dark comedies, and this was definitely a good one, especially one that also examines privilege, social media, and I think that while it wasn't necessarily a perfect film, it definitely had me on the edge of my seat, definitely had me interested in what was happening. I did care about the characters. I was kind of confused, and I did spend a lot of time trying to figure out the twist. And I will say that I was not able to figure it out. I don't necessarily think that I am the best at figuring out twists, but I'm pretty good. I can hold my own, and this one definitely had me yes, had me shocked. Very shocked. This last submission is honestly, I think the reason why I was drawn to it was because it reminded me of a lot of movies from the like mid to late-ish 2000s. For example, like Maria, Full of Grace, even Crash, that those like shaky cam kind of crime, realistic. I'm not totally sure if I'm like getting this right, but not so much. It's not so much that this fits in with this story exactly, but the way that it looks and the way that it's presented, it has these echoes or homages to this like kind of filmmaking at that time. Emily the Criminal is about a graduate who has to figure out, how to pay her student debt. And so she's working and she ends up getting into a credit card fraud scam, and things pretty much get out of hand, as you can tell by the title. I'm not even gonna lie to you. What makes this movie is Aubrey Plaza. I did not get into that when I was talking about the White Lotus in this video, but yeah, like I was. Okay, so I was introduced to Aubrey Plaza like everybody else with Parks and Rec. But I ended up also watching her in Black Bear, and oh my God, that I think is what cemented her in my head as this like very brave and just like willing to test her skills kind of actor. She is making just more and more different and experimental things, and I like that she's not afraid to try this, you know, because she also did Happiest Season, which is like super hallmarky. So it's like the fact that she's willing to kind of jump in and out and do projects that interest her and that kind of challenge her. I feel like this is one of those films. So it's a very simple storyline, but at the same time, I've noticed that I've been leaning more towards simple storylines as of late because I just really want to see what the actor has to bring to that role. And Aubrey brings a lot. And she definitely is just, it's hard to not watch her in this movie. And I think that if you haven't checked it out, you should definitely go check this out because I wouldn't be surprised if this also ends up getting some Oscar buzz. I think it should, but I don't know if it will. It definitely, again, you see what I'm saying? Like, there are a lot of these films that I've seen so far that I feel like have echoes to Oscar winning films in the past that just fit some sort of, you know, appeal to the Academy. And so I'm just very surprised that, you know, these movies haven't really been given their audience. So that's what I've been watching in 2022. Did you like my list? I had to keep some of the stuff that I really wanted to talk about out of this video just because I really wanted to talk about it later because I do have some plans to talk about the best and the worst of 2022. So mea culpa if there was something that I didn't talk about that might have been on your own personal list. You may see some of these pieces and more on that video down the road. So just be on the lookout. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram so that you can be on the lookout for those things. It's at Critical Com with 2M's TV. But until then, please let me know what you thought of my list and let me know if you had your own personal list of TV and film of 2022. You know, like let me know what you're watching. I'm curious to see what you think is going to be on the Oscar trail. I know that we've got some of the Golden Globe nominations out, but people don't really seem that excited about that, understandably, as you know, I didn't do a predictions video. I do want to know what's going to happen down the line. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Bye, everybody.